Okay, welcome to a very special episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have an amazing Seiko for you, one from my personal core collection. A little bit about the brand. Seiko was founded back in 1881. They're Japanese in origin and have factories throughout Asia. They cover all market segments from entry level to high end. In terms of the type of watch, this is a dive watch inspired by one of Seiko's first. I shouldn't say one of, but the very first dive watch. But some key characteristics and design language you're looking for a diver. Of course, you're going to want water resistance, typically some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible with a dive time bezel, and a divergent extension is nice if on bracelets. Now, this is their Prospex model SLA017. That's the international nomenclature. Or if you're looking for the JDM model, it would be the SBDX019. So essentially the exact same watch, just for two different market segments in terms of the sales. This is a 2,000 piece limited edition 62 MAS reissue from 2017. This is just a premium recreation of Seiko's very first dive watch. Of course, the very legendary 62 Moss. Now, these originally sold for an MSRP of $3,400 and now have been trading anywhere between $4K and even all the way up to $10K, depending on, of course, the condition and the location of the seller. I actually picked this one up recently to kind of commemorate my 40th birthday, as well as my YouTube channel, this one, reaching 30,000 subscribers. So I've actually kind of given the backstory about this watch and everything that kind of went into picking it up in a live stream, as well as I've even done a comparison between it and the ever popular non-limited edition Prospex SPB143, but I haven't done a dedicated review for it, so I thought, why not, especially when just looking at it now through the little flip out screen on the camera. The camera loves it, right? So hopefully you guys will enjoy while I go in and really just kind of gush about how much I love this watch and why. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, so in terms of just the Japanese and their execution and their attention to detail for, utility and utilitarian pieces, you got to look at something like this Douglas Field Lighter, made in Japan. And it's essentially, a very old school, trench lighter, but just executed to such a high level. I mean, it's really fantastic. I absolutely adore this. And this is just another example of kind of this space in this genre. Also, when I look at something like, let's say, my Rockstead here, this beautiful Heisen with its look at that bevel. My gosh, this is essentially kind of the grand Seiko of pocket knife makers in Japan. This is using a super hard steel here with this ZDP 189, and of course you can see that bevel is amazing, right? Highly reflective, just mirror-like finish, right? That's just pretty wild. You can see me in the reflection there, and then of course it's contrasting with that beaded satin finish as well. Just gorgeous, and again, something quite utilitarian, but finished to an absolutely very, very high standard, just because, right? It's just something with that ethos there. And then you take something like the original design from, Seiko's first dive watch, dating all the way back to, I believe it was 1965. And you have something here when they've recreated it, also improved it in a lot of ways, right? You're getting now one and more water resistance, 200 meters of water resistance. You're also getting a unidirectional rotating bezel. You're also getting sapphire. You're also getting a hacking hand windable movement at a higher frequency. because this is going to be beating at 4 hertz. So just so much to love here. But again, it's not just a simple recreation, it's also an improvement over the original, and I wholeheartedly do believe that they didn't mess this up. I mean, there's certain things in terms of spacing of the font on the dial, or maybe the choice of verbiage on the dial that you might not be super on board with, but this is essentially a better made version of something quite timeless and legendary from that period, where a lot of watches did look similar in terms of this kind of skin diver format with the boxed lug ends there that are straight. But here you have, of course, now with the addition of a 3-link bracelet, and it just makes this feel very complete and very versatile. And this is pretty much, I think probably one of the overall best Seiko divers ever made, and that even includes Grand Seiko, just because Grand Seiko, a lot of their divers have been quite large by comparison, not quite as versatile. And again, I don't think this has the most pizzazz or the most personality. I also have an Seiko SLA039, which I think screams Seiko a little bit more, and it's in an ever brilliant steel case. I mean, that thing's gorgeous, but this one for me is kind of the distilled, quintessential, just this is it. Like, if there was a Submariner for Seiko, this is absolutely that. And the funny thing is, price-wise, it's more so competitive with something like the Tudor Black Bay, except this has, better lineage because it's Seiko recreating a Seiko versus Rolex creating a cheaper version of a Rolex and then eventually recreating a cheaper version of a Rolex, right? So when it comes down to kind of the brand lineage, that's the nice thing about Seiko. It's never has been meant to be the cheaper version of something else. It's always meant to be the finest version of itself. So a little bit of a long intro there, guys, but I just wanted to kind of get all of that out of the way. In terms of the dimensions, 39 millimeter diameter. Also, it's going to be 14.2 millimeters thick and have a 47.6 millimeter lug to lug, full stainless steel, brushed and polished with that Dia Shield super hard coating. It does have a dual curve box sapphire, so that means even at harsh angles, you're going to be getting very nice clarity, quite distortion free, of course, in the center. And then the only spots where you are going to get distortion is going to be right around the edges of that box dome. So really beautiful. Also an inner AR coating, so you're going to be able to really enjoy this glorious, quite luxurious dial. Getting into the tactile engagement here, ooh, this bezel is just ridiculously smooth. 120 click, unidirectional rotating. It's that, again, it's all about balancing the smooth with the tactile clicks. The clicks themselves are not super audible. They definitely, you can hear them, you can feel them, but they don't stand out. It definitely goes more in favor of the smoothness. And there is just the ever slightest amount of play in terms of, space in between clicks on their way to the next click. But definitely one of the finer constructions. Just there's no lateral play, there's no up and down, like everything is just fit to a very, very high tolerance, which is beautiful. Now the crown is also very unique, something you're not going to see a lot, especially on the tool side of Seiko divers. You can see it actually has a signed crown, actually signed Seiko full text, which is something that, of course, ties back to the original 62 masks. And it's nice to see that again recreated here. And you can also see, just really smartly done, how they have this undercut area here, which does accentuate the thinness of the mid case, although this is actually still part of the case, and the case back itself is actually separated by this line here. But when you have it on your wrist, the nice thing is all of this blends. This undercut really helps make everything appear visually much thinner, which is always nice. Now, although you can't see it, this does have an automatic Seiko 8L35, which has 50-hour power reserve. It beats at 28,800 vibrations per hour or 4 hertz. So that's going to be 8 ticks per second there, so nice and smooth like you would expect. And the general timekeeping on these, typically the absolute kind of floor and ceiling out of the factory is going to be -10 to +15, which doesn't sound that great, but of course it runs so much better than that. I mean, maybe I'm getting 2 seconds after a couple of days here in terms of gaining, but this runs just really beautifully well. And from what I can tell, the 8L35 movement runs really well, even without regulation. The nice thing is, if I did need to get this regulated, because it does have an open case back, isn't front loaded like a Marine Master, I actually could get it regulated fairly easily if it ever does start running not well. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Now, getting on to the case back, you can see very nice screw in. It is etched. The original did have more of kind of a stamped, kind of pressed style, which would have been nice to see. But the nice thing is they did recreate that original, original kind of what's the word I'm looking for? Dolphin pattern there, which is really, really cool. And you can see air divers, 200 meters. So, for it to carry that text, you guys know ISO compliance, which is something that's definitely very important to Seiko in terms of producing true tool watches that are meant to be used. Now, getting into the dial here, guys, that's really the star of the show. These indices are so tall. Check them out. Beautifully filled, something that not everyone is thrilled with in terms of execution of newer Seiko loom is it's more of a plop of loom on top of an indice, versus here you can see there's actually a recess portion that has been filled with loom. And that is one of the reasons why this glows very, very bright. It's because there's a lot of loom there. Not only is it, look, you can see there's a little bit of, I can almost get it to just show you some loom right there. It even has a bit of a daytime tint to it because of just how potent this Seiko Lumen Bright is. Now, I did mention 200 meters of water resistance, right? And it's going to meet or exceed those ISO standards to carry that diver's 200 meters text. Although, yes, for the sticklers out there, recently they did update the divers, the 200 meters ISO standards to where you should have a plop there at the 3 o'clock. It really just means you have to have loom plots at all of the points. I think previously people kind of got away with, well, where the 3 o'clock is because there's a date window there. So the lack of a loom plot gives you orientation as well. But hey, it is what it is. I'm not going to be, upset by that. It's just one of those things. Rules change, things change. I'm glad that this was produced in the way that it was, because newer watches are going to have that offset date so that they can remain, which is nice for symmetry in the dark. But during the daylight, I do like to see that traditional 3 o'clock date window, which is beautifully framed, as you can see, in the same way that these indices are beautifully framed. The handset also is going to be polished, but you're also getting bevels there. So let's check that out, guys. So you're not going to be just getting tricks here in terms of, hey, half of it is going to be brushed, the other half polished. So you're going to get that contrast here. You're going to see a bit more depth, a bit more execution there. The effort that's been given there is just fantastic. And then, of course, very traditional in terms of the visual layout, but it all works. Now, another thing that's a bit controversial here, 19 millimeter lugs, but they are drilled. And of course, you are getting this 3-link bracelet, which is quite thin by comparison to, let's say, the SPB143 bracelet. And I think it is quite nice and fits and suits the watch in terms of the way that it looks, the way that it wears. I pretty much keep it on the bracelet. So very nice. Some things that are a little bit different. You're going to see they're fully milled push buttons, which isn't how it's going to appear on the standard kind of SPB take, but everything is going to be milled here. You can see the milled folding section, and then you're going to have this stamped diver's extension here that is tucked away quite nicely for when you're not using it. But let me just, there you go. So right there to go over the dive suit. if you need it. If you don't, it's still nice and hidden, which I think is very smart. Of course, you're going to have these manual micro adjust positions, and you're also going to get this beautiful beveled chamfer there, and you're going to get nice brushing and nice kind of transition there. So very, very cool. Gives you everything that you need. But with all of that said, let's go ahead and show you how it wears. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5 inch wrist, it wears really well. I do have a more of a round wrist, so it's not just flat and kind of skinny. You can see I do have some depth on there in the side profile, but you can also see that this watch just melts away on the wrist. That mid case there appears visually much thinner, especially with that high polish. Some would even say Zaratsu polish. Beautiful there. That undercut again helps this melt, and you do have that downward sweep on those lugs so they don't jut out or anything like that. Of course, if I do have my wrist a bit too close to the camera, you're going to get some perspective distortion and it's going to appear much larger. So what I like to do is just keep it nice and low here. And then what I'll do is also tighten up the frame so you guys can get a more detailed look while still getting a bit of a truer aspect ratio. You can see that it'll work on a smaller wrist, it'll work on a larger wrist. This thing just has all of the tricks in terms of, you know, everything you would expect from Seiko, and just kind of how they will fool you into finding just so many comfort zones with watches that may be smaller, might be larger, especially larger in terms of melting away some of that mass. And they just do such a wonderful job with that. And that color just pops. I know it's very monochromatic, but you're still getting a lot of play, especially with that high polished inner rehaut there, just reflecting so many different ways, just adding a bit of depth, a little bit of fun, and just gives you again that old school vibe, which everybody loves so much. So with that said, let's actually zoom out, get this back off of the wrist, set up for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Yes, as you can see, this thing is an absolute loom beast. And the nice thing is you're actually getting some reflection off of that rehaut there and that high polish. So you're getting even more loom kind of bouncing back. So really, really handsome there. But one thing, of course, I like to work in is a bit of low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, maybe hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it is nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting. So maybe even include some harsh lighting, which could expose some type of production defects. But all you're going to see here is beautifully uniform light just gliding over that perfect brushing there. Again, it's probably not hairline brushing in terms of like a luxury level of brush, definitely more on just kind of the clean cut professional grade style there, but the polish, the luster in the depth in the polish is very, very impressive, especially when you look at just how finely done, you know, let's say the coin edge is on that bezel or on that crown. And then of course, you know, you can even look at the side of the case. My gosh, just gorgeous. So there is, you know, I'd say at face value, this is quite a sedate and even boring dive watch, but you can see the way that it plays with the light there definitely adds a lot of fun and visual interest. So it's really more about the execution of this piece, while the actual kind of overall keeps it ultra versatile in terms of it being just, you know, a very balanced, well thought out dive watch. And it's definitely a dive watch true of the time in terms of those, you know, very, I don't want to say generic, but I guess you could say generic skin divers of that era. Now, in terms of closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist, really perfect vintage inspired scale and proportions, a lot more balanced than any other 8L powered divers you're going to find. Which in itself is quite challenging because most of them are going to be quite large. And then in terms of model variants, you know, there are various other limited edition 8L powered 62 MAS variations, while with more quirky color palette updates, as well as, you know, there's one really ultra rare black dialed beams limited edition that is actually as a black dial with a black date disc, which is highly desirable. This is definitely that one that is kind of the purified one. It's just clean and just quite lovely and hard to find fault with a lot of the times. So of course there's also always the option to purchase Seiko's own SPB143 or SBDC101 if you're looking at the JDM model, which do list out at about $1,200 list, or you can get closer to around $800 these days, kind of that street pricing. Now, in terms of comparable models, apart from Seiko's other 62 MAS inspired divers, there's definitely a wide array of micro brand and factory brand homages with similar skin diver aesthetics. You know, or if you want to go up market, you could always consider the phenomenal, you know, Glasuit Original CQ out of East Germany for an even more elevated experience. But other than that, I mean, it's really, again, it's tough to compare this to something just because of how pure it is in a lot of ways. And apart from the competition, which a lot of them are just recapturing a certain look, this is recreating a look that Seiko built upon, which I think is really, really fun. In terms of the bottom line here, guys, this diver really has it all. And even after acquiring, you know, 6 years after the original release, I couldn't think of a watch I wanted more to commemorate my 40th birthday. So yeah, this one was just, I've been wanting it for a long time. It wasn't something that I took very lightly. And, you know, of course, another big shout out to the missus for, you know, for getting this one for me. I helped her find the right deal, the right unit here with the, you know, perfectly pristine case back and, you know, with just no wear on it. I was very, very fortunate, but this is just a great example of it. Honestly, if I could track down more and collect them and hoard them to myself, I would. That's how good this watch is. So with all that said, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.